26 years I stood in rooms and said nothing. That was the whole of my craft, if you can call it a craft, the not speaking, the not seeing, the being a part of the wall that happens to have a sword. A good guard inside the household is furniture. You learn that the first week or you don't last. The great folk talk in front of you the way they'd talk in front of a chair, because to them you are a chair that bleeds for them if it comes to that, but a chair. And the price of staying near them, of being trusted in the private rooms, is that you make yourself into a thing that has no ears and no opinions and no face that anyone need ever remember. I was the best chair in the palace of Halvenmark. 26 years, and I'd never once spoken a word that wasn't yes, my lord asterisk, or at once, my lady. Never once. I want you to understand that about me before I tell you the day I broke it, because the breaking is the whole story, and you can't feel what it cost unless you know how total the silence was that it cost me. My name doesn't matter much. They called me Garrick, the guards did, and the great folk didn't call me anything because you don't name a chair, but I'll put it here so the thing has a person attached to it. Garrick. 26 years in House Corvin, most of them in the private wing, the trusted wing, where they put the guards who have proven they can be furniture. I saw everything in that wing. That's what nobody understands about the silent ones. We're not blind. We're the opposite of blind. We see all of it. Every quarrel and every weakness and every secret thing the great folk do when they think the chair isn't watching. And we carry it, all of it. A whole palace of secrets locked in us. And we say nothing. And the saying nothing is how we're trusted to keep seeing. I knew which lord drank and which lady wept at night and which marriages were ice and which of the king's counselors took coin from across the water. I knew all of it. I'd never said one word of any of it. That was the deal. That was me. I'll tell you what that craft does to a man, the silence, because you have to feel it to feel the rest. It starts as a discipline. You bite down on the things you see, you train your face to flatness, you teach yourself not to react when a lord strikes a servant or a lady says a cruel thing or a secret you could sell for a year's wages is spoken an arm's length from your ear. That's the early years. It's effort then. But it doesn't stay effort. That's the thing. Do it long enough and the silence stops being something you do and becomes something you are. The not reacting goes all the way down, past your face, into the place where reactions are made, until you're not holding the thing in anymore because there's nothing left in you that wants to let it out. You stop having opinions because an opinion is a thing that might show. You stop letting yourself feel much about what you see, because feeling is the root of speaking and you've cut speaking out, so you cut the root too to be safe. By the end I could watch almost anything in those rooms and feel almost nothing, and I'd told myself for years that this was mastery, that I'd perfected the craft, that I was the finest furniture in Halvenmark. I know now it wasn't mastery, it was a slow dying. A man who has trained himself to feel nothing about what he sees has trained himself, by inches, out of being a man, and I'd been doing it for 26 years and calling it skill. And I never once felt the wrongness of it, because feeling the wrongness was exactly the thing I'd trained away. There were things over the years that should have moved me and didn't. I want to confess that because it's part of what I owe. I'd stood furniture through cruelties, small ones mostly, the ordinary casual cruelties of the powerful toward the people who served them, but cruelties, and I'd felt the old early flicker of that's wrong fewer and fewer times as the years went, until it almost never came at all. I'd become a man things happened in front of. Not to. In front of. There's a difference, and I'd spent 26 years widening it until I thought nothing could cross it. Until I was sure there was no longer anything in the world that could reach through all that practiced silence and make the buried man stand up. I was wrong about that, but only barely, only because of letters, only because of one child. And if it had been anything else, anything less, anything but a small girl writing to her dead mother, I think the silence would have held and I'd be furniture still, seeing everything, feeling nothing, the finest chair in the palace, slowly disappearing. That's the man I was when they handed me the coffer. I need you to see him clear, the hollow practiced silent man, so you understand what it took to crack him, and what it cost when he cracked. Let me give you one, so you don't think I'm exaggerating the hollowness. Years back, 15 years more, when I was younger and the silence in me wasn't yet complete, I stood night watch in a gallery while a great lord of the court, a man whose name still means something, beat a page boy half to death for spilling wine on him. Slow it was. He took his time. The boy made the sounds a child makes, and the lord went on, methodical, because the boy was his to do with as he pleased, and no one in that gallery would say otherwise. And I stood there. Furniture. 8 feet away with a sword on my hip and the training in my arms to have stopped it in a breath. And I stood there and watched a child be beaten bloody, and I did not move. Because moving was not my place, because the Lord outrank my whole existence, because a guard who interferes between a lord and his own page is a guard who's finished. And I told myself all of that, standing there, the whole catechism of the silent, and it worked, it held. I didn't move. The boy lived. I saw him after, weeks after, limping, and I looked through him the way you look through a thing you've decided not to have seen. That's who I'd trained myself to be. I tell you this not because it's the worst thing I witnessed in 26 years. It isn't, there were worse, but because it's the one that, looking back, I can feel the shape of the hollowing in. Younger me felt something, standing in that gallery. It cost younger me something to hold still. By the end it would have cost me nothing. By the end I'd have watched and felt the flat gray nothing I felt about everything and gone home and slept. That's the road I was 26 years down when the coffer came. I wanted on the page boy in the gallery, because the child in the coffer is the same wrong I'd trained myself to stand through, and the only difference, and it shames me, is that this time I was made to read it slowly, in a child's own hand, alone, with no lord watching to make my stillness safe. And then they seized the Lady Regent's coffer, and they gave it to a furniture guard to catalog, because a furniture guard sees nothing and says less. And inside it, I found the one thing in 26 years that I could not carry silent. I'm going to tell you what it was. But let me build it right slow, the way it happened, because the slowness is part of the horror. I didn't find it all at once. I found it the way you find the worst things, a piece at a time, each piece making you hope the next won't be what you're starting to fear, and each piece being exactly that. Let me set the ground first. The Lady Regent Morwen ruled House Corvin in all the ways that matter, though she wore no crown and held no title past the courtesy one. The old king, Prince Edmund's father, had married her late, a second wife, and then died, and left the realm to his son Edmund, who was young and grieving and not yet sure of his own hand. And into that unsureness the Lady Regent Morwen had flowed like water into a low place, and filled it. And by the time Prince Edmund was a man grown and might have ruled in his own right, she had so woven herself through the household that no thread could be pulled without the whole cloth shifting. She ran the private wing. She ran the schedules and the schooling and the small daily machinery of the family's life, and she ran it well. I'll grant her that, everything smooth, everything correct, everything in its place. And I stood in her rooms as furniture for years and watched her run it and thought her cold but able, hard but not cruel. The kind of woman a leaderless house is almost lucky to have. And I was wrong, and the coffer is where I learned how wrong. And I have not forgiven myself for the years I stood in her rooms and saw nothing, because furniture sees everything except the thing it's decided not to look at. And I had decided, like everyone, not to look at the Lady Regent too closely, because she was the one who decided which chair stayed in the warm rooms. There was a child. I have to tell you about the child carefully, because she's the heart of this, and she's small and she deserves care even in the telling. The Lady Alice, Prince Edmund's daughter, his only child, her mother 3 years dead of a fever, a motherless girl of 6 in a great cold house. And the raising of her had fallen, by the smooth machinery of the household, to the Lady Regent Morwen, because of course it had, because the regent ran the private wing and a motherless princess is part of the private wing's business. And so the child had been the regent's to school and shape and order these 3 years since her mother died. and the household thought nothing of it, thought it natural, thought it even kind. The firm, capable older woman taking the grieving motherless girl in hand. I'd seen the child, of course. Furniture sees the children too. I'd stood in rooms while the Lady Alice was brought in and presented and taken away again. A quiet child, quieter than a child of 6 ought to be. I thought in the part of me that wasn't supposed to think, but I didn't look closely because I didn't look closely at anything, because not looking closely was my whole profession. I'd noticed she was quiet. I'd noticed she'd gone quieter over the years, where children usually grow louder. I'd noticed the way furniture notices, and filed it under the 1,000 things furniture notices and never speaks, and gone on standing my posts. God forgive me, I'd noticed and said nothing, the way I noticed and said nothing about everything, and if the coffer had never come to me, I'd have gone on noticing and saying nothing until the child was grown or broken, whichever the regent intended. Now the coffer, here's how it came to me. Something had shifted between the prince and the regent. I didn't know what. Furniture isn't told, but you feel the weather change in a house even when no one explains it, and the weather had been changing for weeks. A coldness between Prince Edmund and his stepmother that hadn't been there before, sharp looks, conversations that stopped when I or any chair came near. And then one morning it broke into the open, quietly, the way these things break in a great house, no shouting. Just the prince's men going to the regent's apartments and coming away with her things. Her private things, her writing case and her coffer of papers, seized on the prince's order, and the regent standing in her doorway watching them go with a face I'd never seen on her. A face with fear in it, and I remember thinking, furniture that I was, she's frightened. The Lady Regent Morwen is frightened of what's in that coffer. And I filed it, the way I filed everything, and thought no more of it, until that evening when the captain brought the coffer to me of all people, and told me to catalog its contents, every letter, every paper listed and noted, by a trusted hand, quietly, overnight, and chose me for it precisely because I was the most furniture of all the furniture, the guard who'd carried 1,000 secrets and spilled none, the safest pair of eyes in the palace, because they'd never once been known to tell what they saw. He couldn't have chosen worse, or better, I still don't know which. He handed the silent man the one thing the silent man couldn't stay silent about, and he did it because of 26 years of perfect silence, and that's either the cruelest joke the world ever played on me or the kindest, and 6 months later I still can't tell you which. I took the coffer to a small room off the muniment stair, and I lit a lamp and I opened it, and I began to catalog in my careful furniture way, a thing at a time. And for an hour it was nothing, household accounts, letters of business, the ordinary paper of a powerful woman's life, and I listed it all in my plain hand and thought the prince's suspicion, whatever it was, would come to nothing. I want to put you in that room with me, because the room is part of it. It was a cold little space, a muniment's room, the kind of place a palace keeps for its dead paper, shelves of ledgers going back generations, the smell of old vellum and dust and damp, a smell like a closed mouth. One lamp, a plank table, a stool that rocked on the uneven floor so that I had to fold a scrap of paper under one leg, and I remember doing that, fussing with the stool leg, the small, stupid, ordinary thing you do right before your life changes, the way I'd fussed with nothing important right before every large thing that ever happened to me. The palace was asleep above me. I could hear it the way you hear a sleeping house, the settling, the far-off single footstep of some other night watch, the wind in the muniment stair flew. And I worked. I'm good at the work. A furniture guard who's trusted to catalog is a furniture guard with a careful hand and a slow, patient way, and I had both. And I went through the regent's papers one at a time, reading enough of each to note it true, accounts, household, midsummer quarter. Letter, the steward of the eastern farms. Letter, the wine factor, dry, dull, the paper of power, and I'll be honest, an hour and I was almost easy, almost bored, half thinking the prince had moved against his stepmother on some quarrel of pride, and there'd be nothing in the coffer but a powerful woman's dull correspondence, and I'd note it all and hand it back and be no part of whatever the great folk were fighting about. That ease is the thing I think about most, looking back, that I was bored. That for 1 hour, with the worst thing I'd ever find sitting 6 inches lower in the same box, I was fussing with a stool leg and stifling a yawn and wishing I were in my bunk. The worst things wait for you under an hour of dull paper. They don't announce themselves any more than the page boy's beating announced itself. The large things come dressed as the dull middle of an ordinary night every time, and you only know them for what they were once they've already happened to you. Forgive me, I wander. I've heard so many of these tales since, the other guards all wanting to tell me theirs now that I'm the one who broke his silence, and they tangle in my head with my own. But mine was a cold muniments room and a rocking stool and an hour of dull paper, and then the false board. And then near the bottom, under a false board that I only found because a catalog man's fingers learned to feel for false boards, a knuckle rap on the wood of a box's bottom tells you if there's space beneath it. Every cataloger knows the trick, and my knuckle rapped and the sound came back wrong. Hollow where it should have been solid, I found the other things. The hidden things. The things the Lady Regent Morwen had kept where no one would look in the bottom of her own coffer, because they were the things that could end her, and also, I came to think, the things she could not quite make herself destroy, because even she, even that cold woman, had kept them, the way you keep the evidence of your own worst act, because destroying it would be admitting what it was. I'm going to tell you what was under the false board, but my hand's not steady yet and I want it steady for this. Give me the space of a breath. 26 years of silence, and the thing that broke it is hard to set down even now, even safe, even with the child safe, which she is. I'll tell you that now so you're not afraid through the telling the way I was afraid through the finding. The child is safe now. Hold that. I'm going to need you to hold that while I tell you what I found, because I had nothing to hold that night, opening the false board alone by a lamp, and it was the worst hour of my 26 years. Under the false board there were letters and there were drawings, and I'll take them in that order. The letters first, because the letters are what made me understand the drawings, and without the letters the drawings would only have broken my heart, where with the letters they did something worse, they made me move. The letters were the child's, the Lady Ali's, written in the big careful hand of a small girl just learning her letters, the lines climbing uphill the way a child's lines do, some words spelled the way they sound, and they were addressed, every one of them, to her mother. To her dead mother. A motherless girl of 6 writing letters to her mother in the ground, the way a child does when no one has taught her better or when someone has, and she's doing it anyway because the missing has nowhere else to go. Letters telling her mother small things, a lost tooth, a bird she'd seen, the kind of nothings a child saves up to tell the person who's supposed to want to hear her nothings. And under the small news in some of them other things, harder things. A child asking her dead mother why the Lady Regent said her mother hadn't loved her. A child asking why she wasn't allowed to speak of her mother in the house, why the Regent grew angry when she cried, why she was made to sit alone in the dark when she wept because the Regent said weeping was weakness and a princess could not be weak. A child writing to her dead mother to ask if she, the child, was bad, because the Lady Regent told her often that she was willful, the Regent said, and ungrateful, and too much like her mother, which the Regent said as the worst thing of all. These letters had never been sent because you cannot send a letter to the dead, and so the child must have given them to someone or left them somewhere, trusting they'd reach her mother the way a child trusts, and they had reached instead the Lady Regent Morwen, who had intercepted them, every one, and read them, and kept them under a false board in her coffer. And I sat in that small room by the lamp, and I understood slowly, with a cold that started in my hands and climbed, that the Regent had been taking the child's letters to her mother and reading them, reading a grieving child's most secret words, the words meant for the one person who could no longer answer, and using what she read. Because the letters changed over the years, I could see it, laying them in order. The early ones were a child grieving. The later ones were a child being unmade, smaller, more frightened, more certain she was bad because someone had been reading her secret heart and using each secret to press on her exactly where she was softest, to teach a motherless 6-year-old that her grief was shameful and her mother unworthy in herself, a willful, ungrateful disappointment who had better become quiet and obedient and good, by which the regent meant malleable, shapeable, hers. That was the thing. That was the cold purpose under it that I came to understand sitting there. The Lady Regent Morwen was not beating the child. There'd have been an outcry if she'd beaten the child. The household would have seen marks. She was doing something the household couldn't see, something furniture couldn't see, something that left no marks because all the marks were on the inside. She was taking a grieving little girl and systematically, patiently, over 3 years, hollowing her out, teaching her she was bad and her mother unworthy of love and her own feelings a danger, breaking her down into something quiet and dependent and frightened and easy to rule. Because a prince's only daughter raised to be frightened and obedient is a piece on the board for the rest of her life, a piece the regent would own, a thread woven into the cloth so deep it could never be pulled. She was breaking the child the way you break a horse, slow, from the inside, so it never knows it's broken and never thinks to run. And the drawings. I said I'd come to the drawings. There were a few of them under the letters and they were the child's too, and I almost can't write this part even now. They were drawings the child had made of her family, the way children draw their families, stick figures in a row holding hands. And in every one the child had drawn herself crying. A small figure with lines coming down from its eyes every time in every drawing, standing a little apart from the others. A child of 6 who, asked to draw herself, drew herself weeping every time, because that had become how she saw herself. That was the self-portrait 3 years in that woman's hands had made. And the Lady Regent had kept these 2 under the board, and I understood why she'd kept them, which was the coldest thing of all. She'd kept them as records, as proof of progress. The way you'd keep notes on a thing you were shaping, to mark how far the shaping had come. The drawings weren't trophies of cruelty for its own sake. Morwen wasn't a monster who enjoyed it. That would almost have been easier. They were a careful woman's evidence to herself that her long, patient work was succeeding, that the willful child of 3 years ago had become the weeping, diminished child of now, that the breaking was on schedule. I sat in that room a long time. The lamp burned down. I didn't move. 26 years of being furniture, 26 years of seeing everything and carrying it silent. And all of that silence was rising up in me at once and meeting the one thing it could not absorb, and I felt myself coming apart along the seam of it because every instinct of my whole life, every trained nerve, said the same thing it had always said. It's not yours. Your furniture. You saw a thing, carry it silent. That's the deal, that's what keeps you safe, that's what keeps you near the warm rooms. Catalog the letters. List them in your plain hand. Note them as asterisk correspondence, personal, various, and hand the coffer back and say nothing and stay a chair. The prince has the coffer now. Let the prince find what the prince finds. It's not the chair's place to point. 26 years had built that voice in me, and it was strong, and it was speaking with everything it had. And under it, for the first time in 26 years, another voice, quieter. Mine, I think the actual me, the one I'd packed away so long ago I'd half forgotten he was in there, the man under the furniture. And he said, if you catalog these as asterisk correspondence, personal, various, they might be missed. A busy clerk reading your dry list might pass over them. The prince might never understand what they are. You know what they are. You're the only one who's read them in order, who's seen the drawings, who understands the shape of what was done. If you stay furniture now, if you do the safe, silent thing now, the child stays in that woman's hands because the one man who understood the evidence chose to be a chair instead of a witness. 26 years you said nothing, and it cost nothing but your own soul, which is cheap, which is yours to spend. This silence would be different. This silence has a child in it. I'm not a brave man. I want that clear. The clean version would make me brave, would have me striding to the prince with the letters held high. It wasn't like that. I sat in that room until the lamp was almost gone, shaking, arguing with myself. 26 years of safety pulling one way and a stack of a little girl's letters to her dead mother pulling the other. And I was afraid. Afraid the way you're afraid of a thing you know will cost you everything you've built. Because a chair that suddenly speaks is no longer a chair, is no longer trusted, is no longer safe in the warm rooms, is a guard who broke the silence and will never be given the private wing again. Will be lucky to keep any post at all once the great folk learn he reads what he catalogues and carries it to princes. I knew what speaking would cost. It would cost me the only thing I was, the only thing I'd made of my life, the silence itself, the safe invisible silence that had been my whole self for 26 years. And I did it anyway. Near dawn, with the lamp guttering, I gathered the letters and the drawings in order, and I did not catalogue them as asterisk correspondence, personal, various, and I did not hand the coffer back and stay a chair. I took them in my own hands up through the waking palace to the one person who could do something and who I had to pray would, and I asked, who had not asked for anything or spoken unbidden in 26 years, I asked to see Prince Edmund. And when they asked me why, the furniture guard demanding audience with the prince at dawn, I said the words that ended my old life, the first true loud words of my whole silent career. I said, it's about his daughter, and I will say it to him and to no one else. They let me into him. I think it was the word asterisk daughter asterisk that did it. A guard who's never spoken in 26 years suddenly demanding audience about your child gets you in the door, whatever the hour. And I stood in front of Prince Edmund, who I'd guarded as furniture his whole life, who had never once looked at me as a man, and I broke 26 years of silence, and I laid the letters and the drawings out in front of him, in order, the way I'd read them, and I told him what they were and what they meant and what I understood had been done to his daughter under his own roof, while everyone, myself first of all, stood by and saw nothing. I won't give you the whole of it. Some of that hour belongs to him, to the prince, and to the terrible thing it is to watch a father read his small daughter's letters to her dead mother and understand, line by climbing line, what had been happening to her while he grieved and governed and trusted the smooth machinery of his household to a woman he'd never thought to doubt. A father reading his 6-year-old's drawings of herself weeping, every one, and understanding that the quiet of his daughter that he'd taken for grief settling, for the child healing, was not healing at all. I watched a strong man come apart in a chair, silently, the way the great folk come apart, holding it in even alone with furniture, except I wasn't furniture anymore. I'd stopped being furniture the moment I asked to see him. And so I stood there and watched a father's heart break, and I did not look away, because looking away is what furniture does, and I'd given that up on the muniment stair with the lamp guttering, given it up for good. The Lady Regent Morwen fell that day. Fast and total and quiet, the great folk don't fall loud. There was no trial in the square, but she was gone from the private wing by nightfall, gone from the household within the week, confined to a distant holding under guard, stripped of every thread she'd woven through 20 years, and the threads held after all when they were pulled, because it turned out a household will move very fast indeed to cut out a woman who's done what she did to its prince's child, even a household she'd thought she owned. I won't pretend I followed the politics of her fall. I'd done my part. My part was the letters and the dawn and the breaking of my silence. The rest was for the great folk, and they did it, and she's gone, and that's enough of her. I find I don't want to spend more words on Morwen than I have to. She had a cold reason for everything she did, and the reason doesn't matter, and I'm done giving her the room. The child, let me give the words to the child instead, what's left of them. The Lady Ali's was taken out of the dead woman's machinery. I won't call it the regent's care. It was never care. And given over to people chosen to be kind to her, and given leave to grieve her mother out loud, and given back the letters, eventually, when she was older, so she'd know they'd reached someone, that someone had read them and understood, and that her grief had not been the shameful, weak thing she'd been taught it was. And the prince, this is the thing I hold on to, the prince changed how he was with her. You can't undo 3 years in a season. The child had been hollowed, and hollows don't fill overnight, and I'm told it was long and hard and is still going. The slow work of teaching a frightened, diminished child that she's safe and loved and allowed to weep. But it's happening. That's what I'm told. The child is safe, and the slow filling back in has begun. And somewhere in the household there's a little girl learning, late and hard, that she was never bad, that she was never too much like her mother in any way but the best ways, that her tears were never weakness. That's the thing I broke my silence for. That's what the breaking bought. I'd buy it again at twice the price. And the price? I said I'd tell you the price, and the price is the quiet end of this, the part that isn't triumph. I am not furniture anymore, and a guard who is not furniture is not much use in the private wing. The great folk know now that I read what I catalog, that I carry what I see to princes, that the silent chair has a tongue after all and will use it if a thing is wrong enough. And you cannot have a chair like that in your private rooms. A chair that might one day decide your secret is the wrong kind and walk it up the stairs. They were grateful, the prince was grateful. No one punished me, but the trust was gone, the particular trust that let me stand in the warm rooms and see everything. And it was gone the moment I used it, which is the nature of that trust. It only exists so long as it's never spent. I spent it on a stack of a child's letters. And it bought what it bought, and it cost what it cost. And I was moved out of the private wing, kindly, with thanks, to an outer post, a wall, a gate, the cold, honest edges of the household where a guard stands who sees nothing because there's nothing where he stands to see. I stand a gate now. After 26 years in the warm heart of the house, I stand at a cold outer gate, and I see nothing but the road and the weather, and I'll stand here till I'm too old to stand, and then they'll pension me off, the guard who broke his silence the once, and it'll be a smaller ending than the one I'd have had if I'd stayed a chair. I know that. I knew it on the muniment stair. I chose it anyway. And here's the strange thing, the thing I didn't expect, the thing I'll end on because it's the truest thing I learned in 26 years of silence and 1 dawn of speech. I'm happier at the cold gate. I am. I stood 26 years in the warm rooms carrying a palace of secrets, seeing everything, saying nothing, safe and trusted and slowly disappearing, until I was so much furniture that I'd half stopped being a man at all, and I never knew the whole time how heavy it was, the silence, how much it cost to carry all that seeing and never once be allowed to be a person who acts on what he sees. I only felt the weight of it when I finally set it down. One time. I set it down one time for one child, and it nearly killed me to do it, and it cost me everything I'd built. And it was the only time in 26 years I was fully a man, fully awake, fully myself, the actual me under the furniture, standing in front of a prince with a child's letters in my hand saying the true loud thing at last. I'd trade the 26 warm years for that one cold dawn. I have traded them, in fact. That's exactly the trade I made, and I'd make it again. They think the silent man lost everything, the few who know the story. The warm rooms, the trust, the soft good post, the quiet safe disappearing career, lost all of it over a coffer he should have catalogued and handed back. And they're right that I lost it. But they have it backwards, the way the world always has these things backwards. I didn't lose myself at the gate. I lost myself in the warm rooms slowly, for 26 years, one swallowed word at a time. I found myself on the muniment stair, in the worst hour of my life, with a lamp guttering and a child's letters in my shaking hands, and the whole weight of my silence finally too heavy to hold. A little girl draws herself smiling now. I'm told that too, that somewhere in the household the Lady Alice was asked to draw her family, the other day, the slow work going on, and she drew herself in the row with the others, and she didn't draw the lines coming down from her eyes. She drew herself smiling. A small thing, the smallest thing, a child's drawing with no tears in it. I stand a cold gate for that. I'd stand a colder one. I was furniture for 26 years and a man for one dawn, and the one dawn was worth more than all the years, because a little girl draws herself smiling now, and the silent man finally said the thing that was true, and some weights you only understand once you've set them down. I set mine down. Once it was enough, it was everything.